Good evening and welcome to a new edition of To The Point. This evening we'll be discussing COP26. Two main outcomes, deforestation and methane emission. Cutting down in methane emission came out of today's COP26. With a distinguished gentleman, we'll be discussing what did we need from that summit, and what will be taking place between now and next year's summit. Will the responsibles shoulder the responsibility? With us is Dr. Islam Abu al-Majd, who is the Deputy Chairman of the National Authority for Remote Sensing and Space Sciences. He's also the advisor to the Minister of Higher Education for African Affairs. A pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure as well.
Quite a large gathering. Even our president attended the sessions. The world has pledged to protect our forests, thus protecting the environment and biodiversity. And it has also pledged to cut down on methane emissions. Those two pledges, in your opinion, at this stage of the environmental threats that we face and their grave consequences, which we're witnessing on a daily basis with changes in the weather, natural disasters, the species that are now going into extinction. I mean, really grave consequences. Are you satisfied with the outcome?
First of all, thank you very much for your kind invitation to this unique program, which always touches the hot topics to the point. Actually, climate change, as you might know, that it's a very great attention to the world since 1979, the first talk about Copenhagen climate change declaration, which went through a lot of conventions and a lot of meetings that end up with the 2015 when they launched the Paris Agreement. With the Paris Agreement, they started to put pressure on the governments and policymakers to cut down zero emissions and how to ensure that the developed countries rather than developing, because the contribution to emission is from developed countries since the industrial stage. And then how to reach to this zero budget emission by 2050 or 2060. This was one of the enforcement and Paris Agreement to the government all over the world. I believe the agreement when went into force, the ratification was not that much in Paris, but later on the big countries like US and China, for example, they ratified in G20 meeting later on in November. So I believe with these big players in carbon emissions and greenhouse gases emission that would get pledged to cut down, this would help the other countries to do the same footprint of cut down of emissions. This is the main contribution to the climate change and to increase. And they agreed to put the increase of temperature into pre-industrial stage of 1.5 degrees, which they might not believe that they would achieve it. Because if we continue like this emissions started, we will reach to 4 to 5 degrees by the end of the century. 4 to 5 degrees, this might create a chaos for the environment, for the people itself. Let us assume, for example, the increase of temperature to 1.5 degree will expose about 14% of the population to heat waves. These heat waves create a most problematic for health and death. I do remember that early 20s, one of the heat waves is about 10,000 people in Europe, they died because
Yes,
of the heat waves.
yes. And there was another one very recently.
The frequency, the increase of temperature would also increase the frequency of this. If it's happened 1 in 20 years, it will be 1 in 5 years.
Yes.
And if it's increased from 1.5 to 2, for example, the 14% would be 37%. So it seems that the consequences of the climate change would create a chaos to the governments, also population over the globe. So I believe the cut down, zero budget of emission would be the solution to the planet. Not
Because most of the serious emissions, the control lies in the hands of the developed countries. The more industrialized you are, the more emissions you have. Will the industrialized, or with this, will they realize the grave consequences of not curbing the way they're doing their business? That they're contributing not just to weather extremities, but also to food scarcity.
Yes.
Because the fluctuations in temperature, I mean, this year we've had some serious consequences with some of the weather conditions in certain crops. Will they realize that they're really contributing to not just an environmental crisis, but in a humanitarian crisis?
Yeah. I believe now they understood how much is this greenhouse gas emission, what they have done in the last 50, 60 years since the Nasser era has made a lot of changes. And they start to understand the consequences of the climate change on their business as well. Because if they continue in this way, like just you said, food security will be affected, water budget, water requirements and water needs, the heat waves and health, the pandemic and the viruses and the other health issues. I think the starting out policy, I think we are in a good position now as a planet because the policymakers start to be convinced that it's a reality. It's not just a scientific research that is giving you some information. It becomes a reality that the climate change would make more problematic to the socio-economic development. And the agreement of Paris and the ratification of the big players, of the big contributor to emissions, means that they start to understand the consequences of such climate change. And we cannot left one behind. So we are not going to say just develop the countries to cut zero budget emissions. We have to make it all over the world just to ensure that it's a unified planet. All the people is doing the same, whoever is contributing a lot or a minimum. This is why Egypt, for example, His Excellency President Sisi said, we are taking steps towards the 2050 cut down emission of zero budget emission from methane and the carbon dioxide. So if this happens for developing and developed, this means that the commitment and the pledge of the developed countries to the climate finance would come into reality as well. So
how come they talked about methane emissions? I know that methane is even has graver consequences. It's more potent than carbon, but we also have a problem with carbon emissions, and I didn't see it taking the headlines, so to speak, in this summit. How come?
I think they're talking about the whole lot of the greenhouse gas emission, which creates the ceiling of the atmosphere, making the high temperature, and then whatever has happened later on. So they cannot on a scientific basis, what's the difference between methane and the carbon dioxide? It's not the issue, but both are doing the same for rising the temperature and making problematic for the change of the climate. But they're talking about the whole industry that lead to such emissions. If it's, for example, transition to renewable energy and green energy, this is quite important. And most of the countries, they said by 2050, for example, or 2060, will reach 100% renewable energy. Egypt, for example, put a target that by 2035 will reach 42% from our Exactly. So this means that if all the governments all over the world, they put a plan how to reach this transition, it would create a very good consequences towards a better climate in our planet.
Is it the fact that we see some parties not adhering or refusing to commit to certain issues that protect the environment, is it a political issue? Because China, for example, we see that there is a battle, a Chinese-American battle, even though the world's environment will be suffering, but we see a battle. Can different parties overcome the political differences, at least when it comes to grave consequences that will be affecting the globe?
It's absolutely right, because this are the two big players, and when they put a commitment, this is the most affected two countries. China is the biggest over the globe, contributing to
carbon emissions.
Carbon emission. Second is the United States, and they were worried about putting a pressure from other countries to put a climate finance. This is why President Sisi, when he said you have to do your job, you are pledging $100 billion per year as a climate finance to the developing countries for the consequences of climate change. Yes. They were worried about this climate finance to put on their shoulder only, not the whole
but shouldn't they shoulder most of the responsibility, taking into account that they are the ones that are doing most of the emissions?
They should, but again, geopolitical or geopolitics is playing a part in this battle. This is why in Paris Agreement they are not ratified as the same in Paris COP21. They put pressure from EU and other countries in the G20, and both countries they ratified during the G20, not during the COP21. So I believe these are the two main big countries. They are always resist this kind of any climate change agreement that put them under the force from the globe. That they
Can the world finance the climate problems or finance the need to go into renewable energy, which is not cheap, for example, or even finance the side effects of global warming? Can the developed or the countries do this without the support of the developed ones that are unfortunately contributing to their despair?
I think this is a battle now in this COP26. They are trying to get a final pledge from the developed countries to pledge the $100 billion US per year for the climate finance to the developing countries. For example, Africa is the most affected continent over the globe by climate change, and is the least contributor to emissions. So it means that 55 member states are under the high risk of climate change, and they contributed zero to this risk. So how it comes? Who is going to pay this kind of consequences of climate change? They made it in the last 50 years. So I think this is the battle now, how to manipulate with the big players, that how to mobilize funds. This is why we put it under the phrase of mobilize, just to who is going to contribute as much as you can to put this pot of money to help the other least developed countries or developing countries that are under the higher risk and vulnerability of climate change. So
will the people put pressure? Because earlier in the day, China issued a warning to its people to go out and get supplies for fear of weather conditions that can contribute to lockdowns, for example. Will the Chinese people put pressure on the government to abide by certain regulations and contribute to resolving the problem? Will we see the same thing in the United States and in other developing countries, whereby the environmental activists really push forth? I know that there are demonstrations and protests right outside the convention site, but will we see more pressure by the taxpayer, if we can put it that way,
Yeah.
to get their governments to abide by certain regulations to protect the environment?
I think this is one of the ways that could the public people put pressure on policy and the governments. But again, the governments or the policies, they look at it in a different way. How their economy will rise or will be affected from this fund mobilization. If you look to COVID-19 and how much it affected the globe. So each country tried to find a solution to the economic problem during COVID-19. So when you put a pressure to get mobilized to climate consequence, this is a long term. I don't want to put it from today, for example, but at least to get a commitment that we will start this climate finance for the next 50 years, for example, because the much increase of temperature, the higher the risk of all the consequences of socio-economic. So if I reach it to this one, for example, the higher temperature degree above 1.5, for example, this will create a chaos to the developing countries. At this stage, I need a plan how these developed countries will contribute to climate finance to make these people alive. So
should we continue in this vein? Where do you expect us to be 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
5 years from now, I think...
If we continue with that percentage of emissions?
We will not by any means reach to the 1.5 degree by the end of this century. Our dream now is to reach by the end of this century just 1.5 degree increase. If we reach it to 2 degree, all the consequences of 2 degrees increase will create 60% of vertebrates will be declined, 4% of birds will be declined, 37% or more for coral reefs will be declined. A lot of ecosystems will be declined. The food security will be affected. The water budget will need for the food, land degradation. All these kind of consequences will create a chaos to the population and socio-economic. So it means if we understood where we are going in the future, so we will start from day one, from now, to stop or put a plan for zero budget, put a plan for climate finance, put a plan for transition to green economy and green energy, for example.
Between COP26 and COP27, what do you think the world should do to protect the environment? What is urgently needed? We're turning to renewable energy, but there are certain tangible steps that definitely must be done immediately to minimize the side effects or not to contribute to further side effects.
I thank President Sisi and the government of Egypt just to host the COP27. This means that Egypt is in the global agenda for gathering such a big event. Yes. So you can imagine 30,000 people in Glasgow right now. So to accommodate a big event like this is quite important for Egypt in its position. So I believe from COP26 to COP27, we will follow up on the outcomes came from COP26 and put like a plan how to implement it. So implementation would be very essential, that which countries will start to commit for implementation plan of zero budget, and what is their plan, which country would pledge for climate finance, which country will make a partnership with others to make like models to forecast in a way to see how much the climate will change. For example, if the precipitation map will change in the future, who and where is this precipitation, of land degradation. So I believe this kind of scenarios will be start to be more developed using machine and deep learning, using satellite data like the institute I'm working NAS is doing a lot of work in this way. Each country will start to put its own strategy like Ministry of Environment right now, they put their own national strategy for adaptation and mitigation to climate change by 2050. So I believe from COP26 to COP27, we will see all these issues, how it goes and who's doing what, and how to put the governments on the right track to achieve what we looking for, zero budget or finance or forecasting what is going to happen.
The fact you just addressed an important issue, which is Egypt's strive to host COP27, quite a large gathering.
Yeah.
The significance, in your opinion, of Egypt hosting such an event?
For me, it's a big significance to the whole world that Egypt is a big country that is able to host this big event. Egypt is with leaders from the president down to the citizens. They understand how much climate change is affecting the world, and we will work together and see how much we are planning for similar to developed countries to mitigate and adapt to the climate change. We have our own strategy, which is well established and will be launched very soon from the Ministry of Environment. We have our own tools and the models that look not on a national level, but look to the region as well and the continent, because we are part of the African continent, and we are talking on behalf, in a way or other, on the continent about what is going to happen to this continent. So all models and the scenarios in partnership with other countries we are doing. So I think it's a big significance to Egypt that is a big country that is able to host such a big event and doing its role in the region.
What about the significance of hosting the summit and our scientific advancement in environmental protection?
I think this is a very good question. That is, Egypt also is looking at education is the future, and education is the technological education is the future for creating jobs and looking to the increase of the social economy and growing the economy of the country. I think education is getting more attention from the last 5 years, and if you see even the budget to the education has been increased. We're reaching now 6% GDP to the education for pre-university and university. This percent is not achievable in any country in Africa. This is the highest percent. For scientific research as well as 1% GDP and even above. So all contribution to the scientific research and education is creating a very good environment for taking care the environment, taking care of the weather and the climate, and put like on a scientific basis what we should do to protect our national resources, our national environment, and extend it to the region as well. I can give you an example that using, for example, Earth observation and satellite data in our institute, NARS, we are able to look at the marine environment on a daily basis, keep an eye on. If something happened on the marine for pollution, for example, we are able to protect it and send the message to environment. We got simulation modeling that look at what is going to happen if the temperature increased and then the sea level rise, what would going to happen to the delta, for example, which accommodates 55% of our population. What is going to happen to the agricultural and degradation, to the coastal and marine resources. This kind of education and resources put you in a frame that you are able to put a plan and able to put a vision to the government, what to do to protect our environment, what to do to leverage the national and regional scale of taking care of environment.
Since President Sisi came to office, he has been very keen on building strong relations within the continent. Yeah. How do you see Egypt contributing to environmental protection or environmental awareness even through education in the continent that we're living in? Because we're rich in resources, but really quite poor.
Yeah.
And we are suffering the environmental destruction that some of our neighbors have contributed to. What is the Egyptian role here?
Egypt's role in the last 6-7 years in Africa has been incredibly increased. And we reached to a point that when I think in 2014, something like this, what happened was the African Union that hold our membership to the African Union. It went like this in one session and by the whole lot. It was a shocking point. Since that time, for the last 6 years, we increased in all dimensions our contribution to African member states. We work on bilateral agreement with most of the African countries. We work on multilateral with more than in the region, like IGAD, ECOWAS. We work with the African Union Commission, and we are sharing in all the experience and knowledge of the African Union to the all member states. In the STISA, Science, Technology and Innovation Strategy for Africa, we are working hand in hand with Africa. We work with the African Union for Artificial Intelligence Strategy and how to foster the technological universities, because we are ahead, steps ahead from African member states in technological university and TVET, because the future is TVET, technological and vocational training, which is a gap of the future jobs. So this is why we got the technological universities, the public university, and new programs. So we transfer all these kind of experience and knowledge to Africa. For example, tomorrow there is a ministerial roundtable discussion, which suppose His Excellency Minister Dr. Khaled Abdel Fattah attended, talking about the online platforms for education. And what is the Egypt experience in COVID-19 in online education? How to foster and extend this online platforms to Africa? How to make a partnership with a curriculum sharing and education sharing, certificate sharing. All this kind of partnerships and sharing knowledge and experience is quite important. In early December, there is Education Week. And parallel to this Education Week, they will talk about how much agriculture and the new smart agriculture would foster the food security and make sufficient food security to Africa. This will be in Nairobi. By His Excellency Dr. Khaled Abdel Fattah is invited to a ministerial meeting for this education to see how much agriculture colleges and institutes in Egypt do in this realm. The research centers, agriculture research centers. And there's a lot of cooperation and partnerships with institutes and member states and African Union from Egypt side. And we contribute. We pledge a lot of money to do that. We invite more than 1,000 trainees from Africa to Egypt. There is scholarships, undergraduate and postgraduates. And there is a platform to apply and get their scholarships in Egypt. Even their dedicated scholarships to some countries away from the public one. That, for example, His Excellency Sisi dedicate 50 scholarships to South Sudan, for example. This is away from any other budget of scholarships. So there's a lot we do in education, science, and technology, and innovation.
Is this a way to consolidate efforts? Do you think this will increase or develop intra-African economic relations?
I believe so. This is quite important, that it will open the market to Egypt, because a lot of products now we can export to Africa. The standards is in Egypt is similar to Europe and Western. So if you get these standards to export to Africa, it's a very big and good market. The second issue is they look to Egypt as a big country. I know we're still developing countries, but they look at it as a developed, similar to them. They have a lot of resources. If we see how to use these resources and to convert it from raw material to industrial product, this would our future plan. I concur with His Excellency Sisi when he said, if you think about any industrial product, look, do you have the raw material or not? This is important. I cannot set up a factory, for example, to do something and I import the raw material.
Yes.
This doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
So if I make a partnership with Africa, I have the resources, I have the low labor market, I have the less education that I could make an education. I can then distribute the products into the same market. So I believe this is quite good avenue for Egypt to extend its knowledge, experience, and the growth of economy in this continent. It also gives you a power that you are a big country able to do some business, you see.
Egypt is taking quite large strides, as you mentioned earlier, to go for renewable energy, an issue which unfortunately we in the past really were ignoring. Can Egypt be the hub for Africa for the production of equipment, if we can put it that way? Solar panels, batteries, and any other equipment needed to go for renewable energy. Can we be this manufacturing hub and export to Africa?
I think it could be. It needs like a good plan and a good industrial vision about how to make. Let us talk about solar panel. If you see there is a laboratory, joint laboratory between Egypt and China in Sohag. And this laboratory is being supported by the Academy of Scientific Research, and even the chairman of NARSA is the lead for this center. This center, instead of it's a research center, it's able to manufacture the solar panel cells, which could be turned into a line, industrial line product. If we put like a plan for this kind of industrial products of solar panels, this could be a very good to Africa. It depends on how much we put our strategy to make a manufacture on industrial scale to be exported. But the answer is yes.
Whenever we talk about environmental repercussions, Africa is always classified as one of the most vulnerable.
Yeah.
How come?
If we look to the marine resource, for example, Africa looks like an island, big island. More than 30,000 kilometers of coastline.
Yes.
This coastline, you would see how many population lean on economy, like fishing from the ocean and sea. If this increase of temperature due to climate change happen, there's a migration of fish, decline of resources, which will affect directly to the population who is leaning on these resources for economy or for as jobs. If the sea level rise increased, this 30,000 kilometers will be flooded. If the change in pattern of precipitation, the sub-Sahara may be not a sub-Sahara anymore. It might be a Sahara, not a green area, like we see in the maps. Yes. So the consequences of this unique continent will be affected largely in all dimensions, and heat waves and increased temperature, in precipitation and agriculture, in agriculture needs and crop yield and production, in coastal and marine resources, and heat waves and health. There's a lot of issues will be affecting the Africa. This is why it's vulnerable. Yeah.
The damage incurred thus far, can it be reversed, or is it permanent damage?
It's a permanent damage. If, for example, I said early in my talk that if the temperature increases from 0.5, not 1.5 to 2 degrees, 1.5 will make about 37% of coral reefs damage. Coral reef, for example, to rehabilitate again, it took more than 10-20 years.
So we never reach the same.
Exactly. If temperature rise to 2 degrees, it will be like 60 or more than 70%. To get it back to 70%, so it takes longer and longer and longer. So to get back, it's quite unhope. I cannot imagine that it will take longer to be come back as normal.
Are countries recognizing the economic repercussions, do you think? Are we reading the picture fully that environmental or climate change is even contributing not just to weather disastrous, natural disasters, but also to the progress of certain diseases? I mean, thus a burden on the health sector. I mean, are we realizing the economic repercussions of climate change?
I think from a scientific point of view, we know that consequence, because there is a lot of studies, and still there is studies are carried out to see what the consequences on health, for example. If the temperature increased, or the precipitation changed, or land degraded, or soil salinity increased, all this create an impact on the ecosystems. Ecosystem would foster or leverage kind of microbial or bacteria or whatever that could create.
It's already creating some.
Exactly. So you cannot imagine or expect what is going to happen and this create consequently a damage to the human health. Human health damage, you cannot put a cost. If you see, for example, COVID-19, how much does it cost on health system? Some health system in big countries destroyed. Because
yes, and economies have been put to a lot of testing.
Yes, sir. So I think this is one of the areas that scientific research community have to look at and see what the other dimension would happen. If it's going to happen to different scenarios of increase or changing of the climate, what will happen to the ecosystem, what the consequences on the health, what is the pandemic diseases might arise. So this kind of research, I think it will be increased in the future.
Food scarcity. Are we heading for severe shortage of food?
I believe so. We are already there in food scarcity, and we have a problem because, again, you need a land, you need a water. And if the land and water are affected by the climate, so the yield and the production would be affected. The requirements of water to grow the same crop would be increased. So a lot of package of the food security.
So the world population is on the rise, and the food supply is declining.
Yeah.
Where is that going to lead us? And you were saying that, unfortunately, damage is not reversed.
Yeah.
So the lands that have been destroyed, you cannot. You can grow other lands if you want, but you cannot really revamp or put life into what's been dead, and there are more mouths to feed.
Yeah. I think each country now look at how to secure their food from different ways. Like His Excellency the President, we launched the New Delta. This is one of the big national projects to face the food security. You got a 2 million faddan that will accommodate a lot of agriculture. And when you go to the New Delta, you need to think about a smart agriculture. So what kind of equipments you will use to use at the minimum water for the higher yield of production. Yeah. So it depends on the strategy to each country will do to secure their food.
Is this going to create political problems.
Indeed.
Because conflicts are for land, but are we going to head for conflicts for the food, for the loaf of bread? I mean, everybody will be out to survive, and each country will have more mouths to feed.
Exactly. I think each country will look at how to secure their food internally, not depending on any import. Import in the future, if this happens, for example, if I'm importing wheat, for example, in the future, if the exporter of wheat needs the wheat, are going to give it to you? No. No. So this is why there is a plans to feed yourself by your wheat or rice, whatever. So unless there is a mutual agreement between two countries, for example, Africa, they have a land and water, and they don't have the knowledge of good agriculture, for example. So can we make an agreement, partnership agreement, to mutually make the agricultural crops in your land and your water, and take a percentage and I'll take the other. I think the future will go in this way, how to mutually create a partnership to secure food for both countries. But each country will think thoroughly how to secure their own food nationally first.
Let's hope it just goes into secure your national food and not other things.
I hope so.
Before we wrap up, whenever we talk about environmental issues, we don't see human rights activists really participating in the dialogue, participating in this controversy, voicing out loud the grave consequences and the unfair repercussions on the poor countries or the least developed or the world at large, really. Where is the voice of conscience of human rights organizations when it comes to environmental protection?
I think human rights, they look from their own perspective. They don't look at the environment, but there is another campaign of environment who is taking care. This is why most of the environmental campaign are existing in Glasgow for the COP26. But human rights, I don't see their activists in environment. They always look to the human right from their own perspective. That is,
even though this is really a humanitarian catastrophe.
It's not their agenda, I think. They look at from different agendas. So I believe so.
And Dr. Islam Abu Al-Majd, thank you very much for joining
Thank
us
you.
this evening. A real pleasure to have you with us. I'd like to thank you, the viewers. Wish you a very pleasant evening and good night.